Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really grateful that we could be here together from different corners of the world. First, we want to thank Center for Contemporary Opera for facilitating this conversation. I wanted to go around and introduce our guests today. We have Lisa Flanagan, who is an award-winning narrator, voice actor, stage director, improviser, and opera librettist, as well as a classical singer, who is joining us as the librettist for We The Innumerable. Hi, Lisa.
Hi. Thank you, Nilu. Yeah, I'm happy to be here today. I'm joining from Brooklyn, New York.
Awesome. We have Harris Doran, who is an independent film writer, director, actor, and producer. He's joining us as the stage director for We The Innumerable. Hi, Harris.
Hey, how's it going? Excited to be here. I am in Washington Heights and I'm excited to talk about this.
Thank you. We have Corrine Byrne, who is an acclaimed singer and the chair of the vocal studies at Laundry School of Music. And she is the lead soprano as the role of Roya in We the Innumerable, who is the heroine of the opera.
Thank you so much. So excited to be here. I'm actually in West Virginia right now in a cabin. We decided to escape for 2 weeks, but I'm originally from Boston, and I'm from Boston and New York.
And we have Golnar Shahyar, who is an Iranian Canadian vocalist, band leader, performer, composer, and multi-instrumentalist. She recorded a segment for the opera as Roya's mother. Thank you, Golnar, for joining us.
Hello, everybody. Happy to join you from cold Vienna, Austria.
Oh.
Yeah.
Awesome. And lastly, we have Nahid Siamdoust, who is a visiting assistant professor of women's studies and the anthropology of religion at Harvard University's Divinity School. And she is the author of Soundtrack of the Revolution, The Politics of Music in Iran, published by Stanford University Press. Hi, Nahid.
Hi, Nilu and everyone. Happy to be here. And like Lisa, I'm also in Brooklyn.
Well, actually, lastly, we have our composer and moderator, Niloufar Nourbakhsh.
Hi. Thank you. I'm really grateful to have all of you as the collaborator on this piece. It has been quite a journey and really excited to delve into this conversation to talk about this piece. And so for our audience who might not know about the piece, We the Innumerable is a one-act chamber opera that is inspired by the real events of 2009 Iran Green Movement. And it's essentially about a couple who get really involved in the Green Movement and the protests that have erupted, and essentially the heroine of the opera is put into a situation to become a part of the propaganda machine, and it's really the decision if she really will do that or not. And it's her emotions of grappling with how to be courageous and not submit to a lie and keep the memory of her husband free. And in doing so, she will become the heroine. So let's quickly take a look at the trailer for We the Innumerable. So first I want to talk about why I decided to write an opera that took so much of my life, and I did not know that it would be so difficult. If I knew, maybe I wouldn't have done it. But no, I'm really grateful. Um, so I actually moved to the US in August 2010 to study music at Goucher College in Baltimore. And it was right after the events of 2009, that whole year. So I really witnessed that whole unraveling of post-election 2009 to 2010. And, those events really rattled me. It felt like I'm watching history, and so many people around me were being affected by it in so many different ways. And it really felt like a very significant event. And I felt like I really had to write about it in some way and with my music. But I just didn't know exactly how, until I felt like an opera is really the most appropriate way to talk about those events. And so that's why we did it. And well, now I want to actually go to Nahid. Nahid, as someone who has been on the ground in 2009 as a journalist, you were covering events in 2009 in Iran. What were some of the key events that actually led up to that moment in Iran?
Yeah, it really was an incredibly significant event for Iran. 30 years after the revolution of 1979, there had been a movement for reform, as of the mid 90s onward with President Khatami, and that movement had continued until about 2005, when Ahmadinejad, the sort of, a reactionary populist president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, was elected. And Ahmadinejad's presidency, I feel like some Iranians in Iran have also sort of, compared it to Trump's presidency and its populism and its sort of, supporting darker elements and negative elements within society and conservatism, and sort of going against the openness and the hopefulness of the reformist movement. And so really in 2009, when Ahmadinejad came up for re-election, there was a huge movement, the Green Wave, the Green Movement, to bring in another candidate, Mir Hossein Mousavi, who would have been the reformist candidate. And this movement was so immense. It was all across Iran, but specifically in Iran, it was very cross-generational, and I also argue cross-class, because subsequently there have been people who've said, oh, it was a very middle-class movement. I disagree as somebody who was on the ground. There's a huge movement to support the candidate who was calling for greater rights, greater freedoms, for greater equality between the genders, because of course, Mir Hossein Mousavi was appearing, holding the hand of his wife in all of these public sessions. Zahra, I'm now blanking on her name. Rahnavard, who is a very important, powerful person in her own right as a writer and a director of the university in Tehran. And so all this optimism toward bringing about change culminated ultimately in Ahmadinejad's election. And a lot of people were really just incredulous. They didn't believe that the election results were correctly reported, and that this was a stolen election. And so if we wanted to compare it to the US, example, you'd kind of have to imagine all of this movement toward electing Biden and then Trump sort of taking office again, and the kind of desperateness and hopelessness that would ensue for a lot of people subsequently because of those dark and negative politics of exclusion and so on. And so what happened after it was declared that Ahmadinejad won the elections, this wave of support for Mir Hossein Mousavi turned into protest. Where is my vote? Where is our vote? And most of these protests were, at least from the protesters, if not all the protests, as far as the protesters were concerned, were peaceful protests demanding to know where the votes are. And they were immense. The largest one 3 days after the election was in the order of maybe 2 million. So a huge protest, the biggest since the revolution. It was a very hopeful moment. I feel the majority of the protesters, I believe, and they stated so in conversation with me, really believed that they could bring about change. They really thought, and in, you know, subsequently sort of in retrospect, quite naively, I suppose, really believed that the supreme leader would step in and declare that there would be a re-election or some kind of recount of the election. But once Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei stepped in and said, no, these were the results. And in fact, Ahmadinejad's position and stance is closer to mine and this issue is closed. It was clear that the government was going to go strongly against the protesters. And so this wave started of real opposition and still trying to change things, but sort of desperation started seeping in. And at the time that you recount for your piece in December 2009, this was already 6 months into the elections. And so, you know, you had those who were still trying to bring about change on the streets. Around Muharram is when the scene takes place in your opera. And at that point, there was a real sort of, you know, real contest between this hopefulness that I think is represented in the figures of Roya and Siavash. Siavash is a symbol for innocence in Iranian literature as a name, and Roya, which means dream, who's still kind of hoping, but is a bit more reticent. And there's this real contest between sort of that hopefulness that something change might still be possible, and the dark forces that are out there and that are, you know, shutting down this opposition and the kind of dissent that was happening. So that's the moment when your beautiful piece takes place.
Thank you so much for that, Nahid, for that really beautiful and accurate way of describing the events. And you know, you mentioned the Muharram as a scene that we picked for the protesting in the piece. You know, what are there some other experiences that you kind of observed in the opera that kind of that kind of depicts in the moment? You know, certainly the second scene, as you mentioned, was one of them. But anything else that you kind of observed in the piece?
That was sort of particular to Iran. I mean, the 2009 protests in Iran really kicked off a wave of protests across the region. So it was the first of protests that then not culminated, but 2 years later, we had the Arab Spring, 2011, starting off in Tunisia and Egypt and onward. And then not too long after, about a couple of years later, the Gezi Park protests in Turkey. So the protests in Iran really kicked off this wave of social movements in the Middle East. So a lot of these segments that you mentioned in your piece become quite sort of relevant to what happens in the rest of the region. But at this particular moment in time that you're writing about in 2009, and in your opera, of course, there are many things that are quite particular to Iran, especially musically. I think you have both the azan, the call to prayer, as well as the figure of Siavash as the martyr, who's also sort of compared to the figure of Hussein at the Battle of Karbala, which is a seminal mythology for Iranians and Shia Islam. And so you have, all these sort of various strands of Iranian culture, both folkloric and religious, weaving together to tell this story of this moment. There's also, you have the song, the campaign song of Mir Hossein Mousavi, Aftab Karan, which was such a powerful song at the time, because it really was a song of the communist Fedayeen that the Mousavi campaign youth group decided to pick up. And it kind of signaled to Iranians that, the divisions of the revolution of 1979 were to be sort of overcome. And this was to be a new beginning where we are accepting of all kinds of Iranians within the political spectrum. So I think bringing in those musical tracks from the time itself is really significant and powerful in your piece. You also have Hamichi Arume of Hamid Talibzadeh, which at the time was really ridiculed because, Hamichi Arume means everything is calm, and nothing was calm in Iran at the time. And so even though he sang that song in the diaspora, it was really picked up by Iranian state radio and sort of played on repeat sort of 24/7, sort of, pumping this music into the air that everything was calm and everything was fine and quiet. And it's interesting because somehow this message has seeped into Roya, and in her moment of waiting for Siavash, she's even murmuring this song. kind of is an interesting sort of exposition of the way in which propaganda and the kinds of media messages we receive, regardless of the sourcing, do seep into people's consciousness and realities. And you really play with that, I think. And another thing that's not necessarily particular to Iran, but the Iranian government has been very good at, has been, creating disinformation and show trials and forced confessions. And these are things that are really highlighted in the interrogation piece that you have. So really playing with this idea of, I think, really relevant to the contemporary US reality as well, of, ideas of truth and the manipulation of truth, and the courage necessary, the sort of clarity necessary to hold on to what one knows to be true. And so I think, as much as, you have all these elements that are quite particular to Iran, they're also very universal. And I think that's what really spoke to me in your piece.
Thank you so much. I'm really honored to hear that another Iranian can like see all these elements into it so beautifully, and that I don't have to talk about them and you just saw them through, and that's the most awesome part. Thank you so much for that. So I'm gonna take a step back into the process of the piece and the collaboration. And I'm going to ask Lisa how she got involved with the piece.
It started with a very long car ride from Stony Brook and Long Island all the way back into Manhattan. It was winter, and I was a singer on a piece that Nilu was working on at Stony Brook for a group called a collaboration with a group called Roomful of Teeth and their a cappella work. And she was giving me a ride back into the city after the rehearsal and started telling me about wanting to write this opera. And there was a plot and story at play based on some events from 2009, and the relationship between Basenji, not soldier, kind of a unofficial police force kind of thing. Paramilitary, thank you, that's the word. Involved in the murder of a protester. And almost none of that it was a whole different story that is not related to what ended up being written. But we, over the course of the ride, started talking about scene structures and things like that. And Nilu asked if I wanted to be involved, if I wanted to help be the librettist. And actually, no, at that point, she asked me if I wanted to be the librettist, and I was enthused. I was down for it. And we started writing, and I wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote, wrote, wrote. And I think we threw everything out. Everything got thrown out. It was amazing. And then I had to go back and we rewrote, and it was fascinating, and it's difficult because this is a real moment in history, and this is a real culture that's not mine. And part of my job was to just help Nilu find the piece and get out of the way of it, and let go of a lot of ideas in terms of fictionalizing things or whatever I would see in things for what the greater ideas in the piece were. And it was great. It was hard, and it was great. And doubly so because this is part of Nilu's PhD and her dissertation. So even more so, I was like, this is not the place to stomp my feet and say, I want this, because this piece had other means and other things to do. But a lot of reading. You provided me with incredible we had really incredible talks, because also a lot of it was about paring down florid language for a more spare style you liked, for paring away fiction for a moment in history, and for the words you use and the culture you wanted to infuse into this, and just helping shape things. And I've learned a lot on it, and I've been very honored to be a part of it.
Well, you were incredible. I mean, I think what I really loved about the collaboration is how much you really immersed yourself in that time in history in Iran, and you were like searching and telling me stuff that even I didn't know. I was like, oh really? And then she's like, yeah, this happened. I'm like,
Well, I'm like, this is what I like research.
yeah,
That's the one thing that really served me well is I like research, and you provide wonderful resources. I think my favorite moment was at one point we were at a bar and you were like, yeah, I don't really like English poetry. And you were kind of like, don't dig it. And I was like, okay, what do you like poetry wise? And you ended up giving me like a great list of female Iranian poets, and we incorporated from that um, Shola Wolpe's translations of Farrokh Farrokhzad. Yes, yes. Um, which all her poetry just needs to be set to music and become some opera unto itself. Her whole life does. And this incredible Iranian poetess who lived mid 20th century and um, really was a woman who was a revolution in her own right in terms of the sexuality she expressed and the beliefs she had and the fact that she just would not be put down. Like, I think they institutionalized her at least twice, and that she was just like, cool, no, still going to be me. And so the fact that we got to incorporate some of her words into this, and not just her words, but talk about her as a poet, one who the heroine Roya is inspired by. And for how the heroine Roya is someone who, in the midst of this protest, and I think something that was very real in the past year was someone who wants to support a cause and wants to hope, but is even afraid on just such a physical material plane of like, I want to be there, but I'm afraid to actually be there. And balancing that and the consequences of that. Yeah.
Yeah, that I mean, also the segments that you picked, I cannot believe how relevant her words are, even like after 50 years of just talking. So it really felt like she's talking about the events right now, which is also incredible. Poet Furugh
Yeah.
Farrokhzad.
There was a lot more I wanted to use, and I was just like, we can't just make this a whole thing of that. It would
Yeah.
lifting just all those translations.
Next opera.
That'll be the next project.
Yeah, the next one. I mean, it kind of will, but yeah, that's fine.
If you're interested, you're listening to this anyway. Okay.
Shole might know. We'll talk to Shole about it later. Her translations are wonderful.
So now I want to go to Harris and talk about actually the development stage of the opera. So you actually came on board pretty early, compared to other, I think, developments in the opera where the stage directors kind of come like relatively after the opera is finished, the music, I mean. So tell us about what that meant and what resonated with you about the story and the piece in general.
Yeah, I mean, I was brought on by our mutual friend Lena, and the reason that I think there were multiple reasons why she thought that I would be a good fit for this. Um, One, that not only do I direct, but I write, and I've written a lot of screenplays and musicals, and so I really know structure. And so at a really early stage of writing, after all this amazing work had been done, coming in before the music had been written, it's still flexible to change. It's very hard to rewrite something once you've written like a score. It's pretty impossible. So, I read it and sort of was like, let's wait to continue writing this, and let's like look at this structure so that we're not in position later to have to figure out how to rewrite it. And so I asked Lisa a lot of questions to sort of help continue down the path that she was already going on in terms of how to have a really beautiful completion to the arc of the story, and how to activate certain parts. And for me, I look at something of like, how do I stage this? How do I stage this? So I'm like, if I have to stage this of people just standing and singing, then that's problematic for me. So like, how do we get this like into motion, into action, you know? And I think that's my background as both like a filmmaker and also like a musical theater maker, of where, you know, you don't have the luxury of like, okay, we're standing here and singing for 10 hours. But then I think the other main reason that I was brought on is because I've been so politically active in terms of the resistance to Trump. I, you know, was one of the leaders in terms of flipping the New York State Senate in 2018, that I was working nonstop around the clock to educate New Yorkers on what was going on in our own backyard that no one knew about. And so I think it's the combination of like having dramaturgical skills and then being extremely politically active. And for me, I looked at this piece and, you know, I was one of the people saying from the beginning, like this man is a dictator. This man is, I mean, for me, my background is, you know, Jewish family. So my you know, part of my family that survived the Holocaust and didn't survive the Holocaust, were saying this man is like Hitler. Hitler was a joke. He was a clown, and he did what he did. And so, you know, my family was very clear on what was happening, when a lot of other people thought that that was a really extreme position to take, of like to call this joke of a person Hitler. And it's like, well, the reason that he didn't get to become Hitler was because people woke up early and they paid attention. The resistance happened, and there were, you know, a lot of people that in this country that, you know, were able to take history and apply it right now, so that 4 years down the road didn't happen, right? And we came very close to it. And I think what's incredible is, you know, what happened, what's in the piece, you know, is exactly what we were headed toward in terms of truth, in terms of, you know, propaganda. And you have, you know, Republicans who, you know, did go down the road of like, okay, we are going to lie and we're going to force people to lie, you know. And so I think it's, you know, we feel a relief right now, but I think that that is really naive of us to feel so relieved right now, because if we let up, it'll just go back and it'll be worse. You know, we're lucky that Trump was an idiot, right? Because down the road is the Trump that's not an idiot, you know, and then we end up where this piece ends up. Do you know what I mean? So I think that people need to not sleep. And I think that this piece becomes, while during writing this, in working on it during the Trump era, I thought was like really important and relevant. Now it feels almost like important educationally, to where we have to be like, watch that we don't end up here. And so I think the piece actually is almost more important now that we're actually past Trump, because of the future Trumps. Yes.
Thank you so much for that, Harris.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's we do feel hopeful, but it's like also hard to continue. We have to be.
And Nilu, that was something you and I talked about as we were writing this a lot, because you talked about how important and vital and how hope was such a key part of the elements of 2009. How the people filled those streets not with destructive rage, but hope.
Right.
Brought these people together, especially across class lines and gender lines and age groups, as Nahid said. And it was really interesting, because writing in the midst of what we've just come through in terms of an administration was, I didn't have that much hope at the moment. I had fear. I was like, I don't get there yet. I'm trying. And it was really, I think I identified with a lot of Roy at that moment, and finding that in between and finding the journey from one to the next, and the ability to embrace hope, and that those how acts of rebellion are acts of love in this. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, that was just my ramble.
No, that's great. I mean, speaking of acts of love, and Roya herself, I'm gonna go to Corrine. So I mean, first I want to talk a little bit about, how this collaboration came about, Corinne, because we met at Song Slam competition very briefly, and you kind of just messaged me on Facebook, I think, and we're like, can I program the scene? We just had one scene from the opera then. This is like 2 years ago. So tell me, and then you brought me out to Susquehanna, and the second I saw you perform that scene, I just knew that you are the Roya. I just knew we had the Roya, and so tell me, why did you program that scene? And
Yeah, of course. I'm so honored that you think that you feel that way, and again, like similarly to what Lisa was saying, it's like our goal is to basically get out of the way of your story, and like I feel very similarly. I was very touched by her saying that because that's exactly how I feel, and so I just feel very honored that you want me to take on this role. And yes, I did meet you at Song Slam. Again, like you said, it was very, very, very brief, but I did make a mental note of you because I just adored your playing, your music, and I think I even just like I wrote your name down somewhere, and I looked you up the next day, and Andy and I both were like, she's really special. And the following year, I programmed a recital called "She Became Fire," and that's a quote from a Nikita Gill poem that was set by Melissa Dunphy, who also had a piece on the recital, and it basically was all about women going through trauma and carrying strength through their trauma in the various ways that word strength can mean. And so, of course, Roya is perfect for that. And when I reached out and said, "What do you have? How can I have your music on this recital?" It gave me a few things, but the scene from the opera was really exciting for me to show the students at the university too, and also to bring to life, and to have you come there also was a really big deal, because having you there to give the interview, and not only was educational for the students, but it was also having somebody there that can give real context to the piece. Like, this was not just like a fictional story. This is a real thing that happened to real people, and so for me, it means, the piece to me means this, it's directly attached to the task that I feel we have as artists to tell important stories, and being vehicles for giving them context. And so one thing I love specifically about new music is that it's kind of easier to see that it's not about us. It's not about our musicianship. It's not about our voices. It's not about the notes on the page. It's about the story. It's about the people who lived those lives and that were affected by them. And being a vessel for the composer. And my relationship with Nilu has been so wonderful because it's so trusting, and it's, musically, she trusts me, and compositionally I trust her. And it's just been really wonderful to work together in that way. And so, yeah, I mean, like I said, it was really, really powerful to have her come to the university and talk to the students about the piece. Why, and that way it's different than a typical performance that's just for entertainment, and then people go home afterwards and kind of do their thing. They're kind of thinking about it, and you'd get messages the next day. I'm still thinking about this. This is really intense, and I can't believe I didn't know about this before. Those kinds of conversations that are, I think, really important to have with young people.
thank you. No, I mean, I was really grateful to be there, and just students were like marvelous. So I remember it as a very, very fun and loving trip. Were there some challenges about this collaboration in particular, or anything unique to this collaboration that you've encountered in your career?
Yeah, definitely. I would say, speaking musically, this is one of the rare pieces that, or maybe the only piece that I've actually been able to fuse an opera sound with some more contemporary techniques, because usually those things are very separate. So I have the opportunity in this piece to sort of jump from a full-throated sound to a pop sound, like in a moment. And yeah, that's definitely a challenge, and it takes a lot of practice. and so musically, yes, it's been a challenge in the best way. And then I think also, since much of Roya's text is very emotionally raw, you sort of as a singer have to dive into that. You can't always sound pretty. You can't always like shy away from the musical rawness in the same way that you can't shy away from the difficult subject matter. So, I think for me, it's meant utmost vulnerability to trust the challenges of, compositionally and for the sake of the greater whole.
Thank you. I mean, you were marvelous at it. So.
Thank you.
So, I mean, talking a little bit more about the music itself, as Nahid mentioned, there are a lot of Iranian elements that come, like the azan, the call to prayer, or the pop song, Everything is Fine, we were able to do a rendition of it by the recording of Deniz Khateri. And, there's some texts that are in Persian and Farsi. And there is also the Kurdish lullaby that we used, where Roya is in her solitary confinement, and she's kind of talking to herself and kind of doubting, if she has to submit to this lie, if it really matters if she submits to this lie or not, and how much does it matter. And then she's kind of remembering her mother singing this lullaby to her, and it's a very famous Kurdish lullaby. And our wonderful singer, vocalist Golnar gave us the honor to record that and bring a totally new interpretation into it. I mean, especially because there is a kind of modulation that I put into it, and then you added in that improvisatory into towards the end. So first tell us about how was this experience of collaboration. Have you worked on operas like this before? I mean, because you are very versatile and you've worked with a lot of different genres in music, and you're in the contemporary scene. So first, tell us about this collaboration, and also second, do you think Iranian classical traditional vocal style has the potential to be in the opera, in the space of opera? Like, if you can be like a role in an opera house, what do you think about that?
Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. First of all, I have to say it's very nice to hear your stories, because I was kind of the outsider and I never was really in person and in body involved with this process. And it's really nice to hear your stories. And I would like to add two important things to what we said. I think this opera is very important that has happened, because it has two aspects of it. One is a social aspect, which brings a different narrative about what an opera storytelling could be in words. Also, it creates such a social exchange between all of you. Now you know this another narration about Iran. Now you know, because usually the American culture tends to be in a bubble, and it's very much formed by the media and the stories that are in the films and everything. So this kind of work is actually the real work, the real cultural exchange. So I'm happy that you saw another example of what courage is, what rebellion is, what strength is. And this story is actually shared among everybody. So it doesn't belong to any nationality. So this is a good example to practice it. Another one is the musical practice of diversifying the musical language, which I think is a place where it could develop much more, because we have, through different genres and different styles of music, we are practicing identities. So musical identities. And now this was more the domination of classical Western music was very dominant in this piece. So I hope that, but I see this as an experiment, and I have to really say there were some parts, for example, at the beginning of the opening of the second movement, the second scene, where all the voices start to experiment how it feels like to be there and how it feels like to be there. This is exactly the kind of work that we need in the musical exchange, musical language exchange. So this opera has touched that also a little bit. Although I hope that a little bit of the instrumentation would have been more diverse to allow more diversity in the tonality, because also, you know, Iranian music is very much around microtonal systems and everything. So I was hoping that these things would be more investigated, the timbre of the voice, the tonality of the voice of the pieces, you know, all these things would be more investigated with the singers, also with Namju, who is at home in this microtonal system. Very important, and I really, really value and appreciate such things, because I see them as playgrounds to new possibilities and future possibilities. As far as my own activities, I live in a country where it's unfortunately institutional system is so backwards and conservative that never even considers existing a singer like me in an opera piece. So forget that. Austria is very, very conservative in what our classical music is and could be. So there's a lot of work that should be done in this country, which I'm also very actively part of, talking about political and cultural engagements. But my work has always been actually practicing my identity in my music. And my identity is a mixed identity. It's a new identity, because it's hard for a woman coming from my generation to have her own identity through music. And part of my work was to find that. And I've been working for 10 years now in the field of music, and I was investigating all these years through different projects. What does it mean to be me in the music? Yeah, so I can't talk so much, but I hope this explained a little bit. And I really see this opera as something very positive from all the aspects that I already talked about, and I hope that it will you continue your work and we see this opera live at some point.
Thank you. No, thank you so much for you know, such an analytical view into the opera. I love it, and actually, hopefully, you know, for the workshop, we'll have Santoor in the mix of the instruments. So I'm really excited about that, about the orchestration of the opera.
Golnar really raised, though, I think, a very good point that we discussed in the writing of this, which was, I think at one point there was a brief phase where we were writing this as almost a neutral setting, and it wasn't yet set in Tehran. And we debated presenting this, you know, and at what point we when you have an American audience with a very limited, often view of Iran and the stories of Iran and the history of Iran, and viewing it as a culture with depth and breadth, bringing elements into it and still weighing things like bringing the azan in was a question that we had to really talk about, because we were like, all right, at what point are we going to have people who are just set off by that because they have stereotypical associations by hearing that call to prayer? And it was, it's frustrating that we had to go into these really drawing these out, these ideas of like, how are we keeping our audience on board? How are we drawing them into a culture and giving them enough information about a historical moment in a topic and a nation that our relationship with and just the knowledge of is very fraught and often built that way by forces much greater than us, on both sides. That you know, America doesn't do exactly a good job in creating a deep view of Iranian music and culture. So that was something that we definitely struggled with, I think.
Yeah, when I came on, that was like my one of my first major questions was about the music, and you know, and did it need to be like a European sound, or could it have a more Iranian sound? It felt like because of the world that it really needed that. It needed like, you know, Persian language, right? Like that's something that I sort of pushed for, that I was like, I really think this sound needs to be there. Piece needs to start with this sound, needs to be in there, it needs to have the language, like the literal language, where it can't just be in English. And because I think audiences do want to hear that. They do want to experience this new world. Like I don't think that there's like a pushback of like, oh, we just want a European sound put onto, you know, this like Iranian story. And so I think that, you know, the work that Nilu, that you've done is so fascinating in terms of finding a way to have both. I think is like really beautiful. Can you talk about that journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's my um, journey of life. You know, living as an Iranian American composer in both worlds. I'm yeah, that's what I'm struggling with all the time. You know, how much of my Iranianness is here, and definitely, you know, a big part of me at this point is also American, and also my upbringing was surrounded by Iranian traditional music. And then my training was Western classical music, very much so that both worlds have been like inseparable from my childhood. And so I mean, I don't have a solid answer for what exactly I do. I just try to be myself. I try to have my own sound world that is kind of a mix of both. But it was interesting to discover in this piece, as I was trying to bring more very direct Iranian elements into the piece. I mean, specifically for the CI interrogation, I wanted to be in a very specific scale in Chahargah. And, you know, as I was writing that, I then realized that the theme I had in the beginning was also in the scale, and I just didn't know that. So I discovered that later on, which was really interesting, that I just unconsciously did the theme in that scale. So you know, there are all these also elements that live in the back of my head and my ears that I don't necessarily know about them, and they just find their way into my music. And it's I mean, I'm so lucky and delighted to have like such vast two different worlds that I could just be in and learn from and grow in, and be inspired by, to find my own voice in my music. Thank you for that question, Harris. Well,
I wanted
yeah.
to, if we have time, I want to shortly say that because you ask a very important question, is does Iranian traditional way of music has a place in opera? I think we should talk about music differently. Why should we? First of all, we have to describe what Iranian music is. Iranian music is so diverse. Iranian music is not just the classical music that is trying to find its social position like the classical European in the social setting. Iranian traditional music is trying to do the same, but in fact, Iranian music is very much more diverse than that. So we have so many ethnic groups. We have modern contemporary music. We have popular music. We have jazz. We have so many different kinds of music and nuances. So which one are you talking about? And also, I think we need to talk about musical language and diversifying the musical language much more deeper than that. Music language has rhythm, has tonality, has pitch, and has um, timbre. So when we talk about these four elements, we should remember right now, currently, the classical European music description of all these four things are dominating the whole world. Okay, so we need to start to diversifying these four forms. If it's getting inspiration from how Iranian maqam system is working, that's wonderful. That should be added to the vocabulary of music. So, you know, that question, if that traditional music has a place in opera, is like, should we bring two hierarchical systems together and present them further? or we break down all of them and make a contemporary music which belongs to current, post-migrational societies that we live in. So these are the things I think that we need to talk about. Okay, and what is the language music of the future? Is it still the hierarchic language music that we have defined through classical European music? And Iranian music is also trying to copy paste that kind of hierarchic system in the traditional versus the rest. So these are the things that we need to talk about. And I think it's very important as people who are actually doing this cultural exchange to be aware, much more aware in the formation of musical language in your piece, also in the communication behind the scene, how you want to really represent these kinds, different kinds of cultures.
How we're framing the entire question.
Yeah. No, absolutely. No, that's a great point. I mean, I specifically meant an Iranian singer as an operatic role, because that was very much my intent, and it's been like sabotaged over and over again. It feels like I can't get there, but one day I'll get there. But I mean, I also think like contemporary scene has a great potential for those breaking of the boundaries that you mentioned, and it's already on its way. And opera is kind of catching up, a little bit behind, but it's catching up. Hopefully sooner rather than later. Well, we are out of time, so I wanted to thank you all for joining us today, and we're gonna wrap up by listening to the aria that Roya is singing in her solitary confinement, that is sung by Corrine Byrne and Golnar Shahyar, and the pianist is Dima Glemensky. Thank you so much again for your time. Take care.